"Take this virgin as your bride," the sheriff said. And the whole town went silent. The frightened young woman was dragged to the altar, her future sealed in a single command. But when the rough-hewn rancher reached for her trembling hand, he froze. Her touch, he knew it. Long ago, in the wilderness, those same hands had saved his life. Now, forced together by law and rumor, they uncover a secret deed worth more than gold land and water men would kill to claim. Whispers in the saloon turn to threats in the night. Fires burn. Shots are fired. And the woman everyone scorned may hold the one truth strong enough to save or destroy the town. As the church bell tolls and the banker sharpens his schemes, only one question remains. Will their unlikely marriage become a curse? Or the miracle that changes everything? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The late afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floorboards. The stuffy air grew heavier with each passing moment as townsfolk packed the benches, their whispers scratching like dry leaves against the walls. Kim stood before them all, her small frame trembling despite her best efforts to remain still. Her simple calico dress, borrowed from the mission, hung loose on her slender form. Sheriff Amos cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the crowded room. "For her protection," he declared, though something in his weathered face suggested discomfort with his own words. "The girl must marry, and marry today." The crowd's whispers grew louder, a current of judgment running through their words. "Untouched, they say," one woman murmured. Another responded, "Yet unwanted just the same." Kim kept her eyes fixed on the warm floorboards, her dark lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. Her fingers twisted the fabric of her dress, the only outward sign of her inner turmoil. The silver cross at her neck caught the fading light, a gift from the mission sisters who had sheltered her. Sheriff Amos's gaze swept the room before settling on a tall figure near the back. "Kean Wyatt," he called out, his voice carrying authority despite its underlying uncertainty. "You've got that big spread out by Eagle Creek. Land, shelter, means to provide." The crowd parted like water around a stone, revealing Kean Wyatt. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his expression as unyielding as the mountains themselves. His brown hair, touched by the sun's bleaching, was slightly too long, speaking of a man who spent more time with cattle than in town. "Now wait just a minute," Kean protested, his deep voice rough from disuse. "I ain't looking for a wife." His hand rested instinctively on his gun belt, though not in threat, more like a man seeking something familiar in an uncomfortable situation. The sheriff's deputy stepped forward, hand hovering near his own weapon. "Ain't about what you're looking for, Wyatt. Town council's decided. She needs protection, and you've got the means." The townspeople's stares bore down on Kean like the summer sun at high noon. He looked at Kim again, really looked this time. Something about her tugged at his memory, like a half-remembered dream. "The girl needs a proper Christian home," Reverend Matthews added from his position near the judge's bench. "It's our duty to see to it." Kean's jaw tightened, but he stepped forward. Years of solitude had taught him when to fight and when to bend. This moment, with all these eyes upon him, was not the time for resistance. The ceremony that followed was brief, stripped of all ceremony and celebration. Kim stood beside Kean, her presence light as a shadow. When the moment came to join hands, she placed her small one in his calloused palm. The touch hit Kean like lightning on a clear day. Memory crashed through him. Pain, fever, the scent of healing herbs. Years ago, when he'd taken that bullet in his side, miles from anywhere. The gentle hands that had tended him in that hidden cave. The soft voice that had sung in a language he didn't understand while he burned with fever. He stared down at Kim, seeing her anew. Her eyes met his for just a moment before dropping away. but in that brief connection, he saw recognition there too. She remembered him as well. The sheriff's words seemed to come from a great distance. Double quotes, ... pronounce you man and wife. The townsfolk filed out quickly, perhaps disappointed that the forced ceremony hadn't provided more entertainment. Their footsteps and murmured conversations faded away, leaving Kian and Kim alone in the courthouse's dying light. Silence stretched between them like a ribbon of empty road. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, and somewhere outside, a horse nickered. Kian studied his new wife, taking in details he'd missed before. The proud set of her shoulders despite her fear, the mixture of cultures evident in her features, the careful way she held herself, as if expecting rejection at any moment. "It was you," he said finally, his voice soft with wonder. "In the cave, 3 years back. When I took that bullet." Kim nodded slowly, her hands clasped before her. "I could not leave you to die," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "The spirits led me to you, saved my life," Kian acknowledged. The memory of those fever-hazed days grew clearer now, the cool clods on his forehead, the bitter medicine she'd made him drink, the soft singing that had anchored him to life when the darkness tried to pull him under. He remembered how she'd disappeared before he was fully healed, leaving only instructions written in charcoal on a piece of bark, telling him how to use the medicine she'd left behind. He'd searched for her afterward, wanting to thank her, but found no trace. "Why did you run?" he asked, the question that had haunted him these 3 years. Kim's fingers went to the silver cross at her neck. "The town was ... double quotes." She paused, searching for words. They would not understand. A girl alone tending a man. "And my mother's people ... double quotes." Her voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken weight. Kian nodded slowly, understanding filling the spaces between her words. He knew the prejudices that ran through the territory like poison streams. "And now here we are," he said, "married by order of the sheriff." "I am sorry," Kim whispered, her eyes still downcast. "I did not wish to trap you." "Trap?" Kian's voice was gentle. "I reckon if anyone's got cause to speak of traps, it'd be you. Forced to marry a stranger." "Not a stranger," Kim corrected softly, finally looking up at him. "I remember your courage, how you never complained, even when the fever was worst. How you thanked the Creator each morning you woke." Even in pain, Kian felt something shift in his chest, like ice breaking up on a spring river. He'd lost his faith when his first wife died, but he remembered those prayers of gratitude. They'd come naturally then, even in his suffering. The last rays of sun painted the courthouse walls in gold and shadow. Outside, the town was settling into evening, the sound of hoofbeats and wagon wheels creating a familiar rhythm. Inside, 2 people who had once touched each other's lives like passing shadows stood face to face, bound now by law and circumstance. "Well," Kian said finally, "I've got a wagon outside. It's a fair ride to the ranch." He paused, then added, "Unless you'd rather stay at the mission another night?" Kim shook her head. "The sisters have been kind, but ... quote." She straightened her shoulders. "I will go with you. We are married now." The simple dignity in her words touched something in Kian. He offered his arm, the gesture natural despite its formality. "Then let's go home, Mrs. Wyatt." Kim hesitated just a moment before placing her hand on his arm. The touch was light but sure, like it had been in the cave years ago. As they walked out into the gathering dusk, Kian couldn't help but wonder if perhaps the sheriff's forced marriage wasn't so random after all. Perhaps there was something larger at work, bringing them together again after all this time. The courthouse door closed behind them with a solid thud, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The evening star was just becoming visible in the darkening sky, a single point of light guiding them toward whatever lay ahead. The sisters at the mission helped Kim gather her meager belongings, 2 worn dresses, a shawl, and her mother's beaded medicine pouch. Sister Mary Catherine pressed a small Bible into her hands, its leather cover smooth from years of use. "Be careful, child," Sister Mary Catherine whispered, her weathered face creased with concern. "That Wyatt man, he's been alone too long. Wild as the hills, some say." From across the room, Sister Agnes nodded gravely. "Hasn't stepped foot in church since his first wife passed. Lives out there like a hermit, he does." Kim clutched her bundle closer, her throat tight. The sisters meant well, but their words planted seeds of doubt in soil already rich with fear. Still, she remembered Kian's fevered prayers in that cave, his gratitude even in pain. That man hadn't seemed wild at all. Outside, Kian waited with his wagon, the wooden bed loaded with supplies from the general store. His bay horse stamped impatiently, harness jingling in the late afternoon air. When Kim approached, Kian offered his hand without a word, helping her climb onto the hard wooden seat. The town fell away behind them as the wagon wheels crunched over the rocky path. Kim watched the familiar buildings grow smaller, then disappear around a bend. The mission bell tolled once, as if bidding her farewell. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Kim studied the passing landscape, scrubby pines giving way to open range scattered with sage and yellow wildflowers. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry piercing the silence between them. Kian kept his eyes on the trail, but his thoughts drifted to those fever-racked nights 3 years ago. He remembered her cool hands on his brow, the bitter taste of herbal medicines, and her soft singing in Apache. The memory felt like a dream now, sitting beside her in his wagon, married by the sheriff's command. The silence stretched between them like a shadow, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of hooves. Kim's fingers worried at the silver cross around her neck, a gift from her father before he passed. The last rays of sunlight caught the metal, making it flash like a star dot. Just as dusk was settling over the land, they crested a small rise. Below them lay Kian's ranch, a modest house built of rough-hewn logs, a barn, and a corral where several horses grazed. A lamp burned in the window, left lit by Mrs. Peterson, the widow who sometimes helped tend his place. "It ain't much," Kian said, his voice rough from disuse. "But it's home." Kim nodded, taking in the sight. The house seemed to grow from the land itself, weathered boards the same color as the rocky soil. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth against the evening chill. Kian helped her down from the wagon, then led her to the door. Inside, the main room was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting dancing shadows. A wooden table with 4 chairs stood near the kitchen area, and a rocking chair sat by the hearth. "Kitchen's through here," he said, showing her the space with its iron stove and row of cupboards. "Mrs. Peterson stocked it yesterday. She comes by twice a week to help with washing and such." Kim ran her hand along the wooden counter, already noting where she could set up her own workspace for medicines and healing herbs. The kitchen window looked out over a small kitchen garden, though it needed tending. Kian cleared his throat. "Bedroom's back there." He gestured down a short hall. "But I thought—" "Well, there's a loft up those stairs. Figured you might want that space." Till ... double quotes, he trailed off, uncertain. "Thank you," Kim said softly, understanding what he left unsaid. "Till trust is built. Till this forced marriage becomes something real, if it ever did." The loft was small but clean, with a narrow bed tucked under the sloped ceiling. A window looked out over the range, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Kim set her bundle on the bed, smoothing her hand over the quilted cover. "I'll get started on supper," Kian said from below. "You can. Well, get settled." Kim listened to his boots on the wooden floor, then began unpacking her few possessions. She hung her dresses on pegs, placed her mother's medicine pouch carefully in a drawer, and set the Bible on a small table by the bed. The smell of cooking beans soon filled the house. When Kim descended the stairs, she found Kian at the stove, cornbread browning in a cast-iron skillet. He'd removed his gun belt and hat, but still wore the wariness of a man unused to sharing his space. They sat at the table, the lamplight casting warm shadows. Kim bowed her head, speaking a quiet prayer in Apache, then English. Kian watched her, remembering how she'd done the same in the cave, blessing the medicine she'd used to heal him. The meal was simple and quiet, broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls and murmured requests to pass the cornbread. Through the window, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their yips and howls echoing off the ridge. After the dishes were washed and dried, they stood awkwardly in the main room. "I'll bank the fire," Kian said. "You should get some rest. Been a long day." Kim nodded, climbing the stairs to her loft. She changed into her nightdress and lay down, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Through the window, she could see the moon rising, casting silver light over the range. Gratitude for a safe place warred with dread of the unknown future. She touched her mother's medicine pouch, drawing comfort from its familiar presence. Below, Kian sat in the rocking chair, studying the dying embers. The house felt different with another person in it. Less empty, but somehow more unsettling. He hadn't planned on marriage, hadn't wanted it since losing Sarah 3 years ago. Yet here he was, with a wife he barely knew but who had once saved his life. The fire popped and settled, sending up a shower of sparks. Kian remembered his desperate prayers during those fever-filled nights, begging God for help. Help had come in the form of a gentle-handed girl who'd vanished like morning mist. Now she was here again, sent by the sheriff's command, or perhaps by something higher. The coyotes sang their wild songs on the ridge, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. In the loft, Kim listened to the night sounds, her heart beating an uncertain rhythm. Below, Kian rocked slowly in his chair, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers, wondering what God's purpose could be in bringing them together this way. Morning, sunlight streamed through the loft's rough-hewn rafters, painting golden stripes across Kim's quilt. She woke to the sound of boots on the wooden floor below and the faint aroma of coffee brewing. After dressing quickly in her simple work dress, she descended the narrow stairs. Kian stood at the iron stove, his movements uncertain as he measured coffee grounds. Kim paused at the bottom step, watching him fumble with the pot's lid. "May I help?" she offered softly. Kian turned, a flash of relief crossing his weathered features. "Reckon I ain't much good at this part." Sarah always ... He stopped, pain flickering in his eyes at the mention of his late wife. Kim moved to the stove, her movements graceful and sure despite her unfamiliarity with this particular kitchen. She adjusted the grounds and settled the pot more firmly over the heat. "The sisters taught me about coffee," she explained, reaching for 2 tin cups, though they preferred weak brew. A ghost of a smile touched Kian's mouth. "Out here, we need it strong enough to float a horseshoe." The morning silence felt less strained as they shared the hot coffee and some leftover cornbread. Through the window, the sun painted the eastern hills in shades of rose and gold. A rooster crowed from somewhere near the barn, reminding them of the day's work ahead. "Best show you around," Kian said, rising from the table. "Got chores waiting." Outside, the morning air held the crisp bite of early spring. Kian led the way to the barn, its weathered boards silvered with age. Inside, the sweet smell of hay mingled with leather and horse. Several horses nickered softly from their stalls. Kian moved with practiced ease, selecting a saddle and bridle. "This here's Thunder," he said, approaching a sturdy bay gelding. He's steady enough for learning. His hands moved surely over the leather straps, demonstrating each step of saddling. "Watch close now. You'll need to know this," Kim observed carefully, her quick mind noting each detail. When Kian stepped back, she repeated his movements on a gentle Mare named Star, her small hands working the buckles with growing confidence. "Good," Kian nodded, surprise and approval mixing in his voice. Most folks take longer to get the hang of it. They led the horses out to the corral where the rest of Kian's small herd grazed. The morning sun had burned away the dew, leaving the grass sparkling. A skittish young Mare danced away from the others, tossing her head nervously. "That's Winter," Kian explained. "Can't get near her most days." Previous owner wasn't kind to her. Kim watched the nervous Mare with understanding eyes. Without speaking, she moved slowly toward the fence, her movements fluid and non-threatening. She began humming softly, an old Apache melody her mother had used to calm fractious horses. Winter's ears pricked forward, her dance slowing. Kian watched in amazement as the Mare gradually approached Kim's outstretched hand. The horse's velvet nose touched Kim's palm, and her tense muscles began to relax under Kim's gentle stroking. "Never seen her take to anyone like that," Kian said quietly, not wanting to break the spell. Kim smiled, still stroking Winter's nose. "Animals know when you respect them. My mother taught me that." The morning passed quickly as Kian showed Kim the daily routines of ranch life. She proved a quick study, asking intelligent questions and showing natural skill with the animals. By midday, they had checked fences, fed livestock, and tended to basic repairs. They rested in the shade of an old oak tree, sharing water from Kian's canteen. The spring breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark trilled. Kian cleared his throat. Been meaning to say something. He paused, studying his hands. "I remember you from 3 years back, when I was shot up in those hills north of here." Kim's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't look away. "I wondered if you would. Thought I was dreaming most times, burning up with fever like I was. But I remember your hands, cool on my face. The medicines you brought." He met her eyes. "You saved my life. I was living with my father's Apache kin then," she admitted softly. "After he died. I wasn't supposed to help outsiders, but ... She twisted her hands in her lap. "I couldn't let you die. You were just a girl. 16 summers." She smiled faintly. "Young, but trained in healing ways by my mother's people. I would sneak away each night to tend your wounds, pray over you. Why did you disappear? When I woke clear-headed that last morning, you were gone." The band was moving on. "I had to go with them." She looked down. "And I was afraid of what others might think, finding me alone with a white man." Kian nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what remained unsaid. Then, surprising them both, he chuckled. "All this time, I thought maybe you were a fever dream. Yet here you are, by way of the sheriff's meddling." Kim's laugh joined his, bright and unexpected as spring water. The sound seemed to startle them both, but it broke something loose in the air between them, like ice cracking on a winter-bound stream. They worked through the afternoon, settling into a rhythm that felt almost natural. As the sun began to set, they returned to the house, tired but satisfied with the day's accomplishments. After a simple supper of salt pork and beans, they sat in the gathering darkness. The lamp cast warm shadows on the walls, and the fire crackled softly in the hearth. Kim's fingers worked at her mending, but her mind seemed elsewhere. "My father," she began hesitantly, "was born to white traders. But he fell in love with my mother, daughter of an Apache medicine woman." Her needle flashed in the lamplight. "They found happiness together, for a time. But neither people truly accepted their union. Or me." She touched her silver cross, then the medicine pouch at her waist. "I carry both worlds in my heart, but belong to neither." Kian listened quietly, watching the play of emotions across her face. He recognized the courage it took to share such things, to trust him with her story. The firelight caught the tears. She blinked back, making them shine like stars. Before he could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet house, bringing with it a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Kim's hand stilled on her mending, her eyes wide in the lamplight. Kian rose slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle that hung above the hearth. Who would be calling at this hour, so far from town? Kian opened the door to reveal a well-dressed stranger standing on the porch. The man's tailored coat and polished boots marked him as someone from the city, not a ranch hand or local townsperson. Lamplight from inside caught the gleam of a gold watch chain across his vest. "Good evening," the man said, removing his hat. "I am Mr. Hollis, attorney at law from Denver. I'm looking for Miss ... He consulted a paper from his leather satchel. ... Miss Kim Standingwater, daughter of Thomas Walker and Morningstar." Kim rose from her chair, the mending falling forgotten to her lap. "I am she," she said softly. "Though it's Mrs. Wyatt now." "Ah, yes. I heard in town about the recent marriage." Hollis glanced between them. "May I come in? I have important business to discuss." Keen stepped back, gesturing the liar inside while keeping a wary eye on him. City lawyers rarely brought good news to simple ranch folk. He pulled out a chair for their visitor, then stood protectively near Kim. Hollis settled his satchel on the table and withdrew several official-looking documents. Miss ... Mrs. Wyatt, I've been searching for you for some time. Your father, Thomas Walker, filed certain papers with my office before his death 3 years ago. Papers that have only now cleared the territorial courts. Kim's fingers twisted in her skirt. Papers? A deed, to be precise. Hollis spread the documents on the table. To the water rights and surrounding land of Eagle Creek, from its source in the North Hills down through what is now township land. Kian moved closer, studying the papers. Eagle Creek? That's the main water source for half the ranches hereabouts, including banker Talbot's holdings. Indeed, Hollis nodded. Would you read it aloud, Mr. Wyatt? Sometimes these legal matters are clearer when spoken. Kian picked up the first document, his voice growing tighter as he read. This deed grants to Thomas Walker and his heirs in perpetuity the water rights and adjacent lands of Eagle Creek, as recorded in territorial survey maps, ... Double quotes. He paused, looking at Kim. Your father owned the creek rights? The deed passed to his sole heir upon his death, Hollis explained. That would be you, Mrs. Wyatt. The courts have now formally recognized your claim. Kim stared at the papers, her face pale in the lamplight. But surely others have claims too. The town needs water. Your father's claim predates the township by several years, Hollis said. It's quite legal. However, ... double quotes, he cleared his throat. I should warn you that certain parties in town, particularly Banker Talbot and his railroad associates, will not be pleased to learn a young woman of mixed heritage holds such valuable rights. You mean they'll try to take it? Kian said flatly. They may attempt legal challenges, or ... double quotes. Hollis hesitated. Less legal methods. Water rights fuel both wealth and bloodshed in these territories, as I'm sure you know. Kim's hand went to the silver cross at her throat. This land was my father's dream. He wanted a place where both sides of my family could live in peace. Her voice strengthened. The deed is mine by blood and by law. I won't give it up. Hollis gathered his papers, returning them to Kim in a neat folder. Very well. I've delivered the court's ruling as required. I expect there will be more ... visits from interested parties in the coming days. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. Good evening to you both. Kian saw the lyre out, then returned to find Kim kneeling beside her chair, head bowed in prayer. Her lips moved silently, but he caught fragments. ... not seeking power. Lord ... Just a home. Show me the path, double quotes. The evening seemed to press in around them, heavy with new tension. Kian paced the wooden floor, his boots striking a sharp rhythm. This changes everything, he said finally. Water rights like that, Men have died for less out here. I know. Kim's voice was quiet but steady. But I can't help thinking this is why the sheriff pushed for our marriage. He must have known the ruling was coming. Wanted you under a man's protection before the vultures circled. Kian ran a hand through his hair. Though I'm not sure even that will be enough once Talbot realizes what he's lost. Through the window, they could see lanterns moving along the distant road to town. Word was spreading already, carried by whatever ears had been pressed to the courthouse doors when Hollis arrived. By morning, everyone would know about Kim's inheritance. Kim rose from her prayers, moving to stand beside Kian at the window. I never wanted to cause trouble, she whispered. But I can't dishonor my father's memory by giving up what he worked so hard to secure. He believed that ownership of the water would protect both his peoples, give them equal access. A noble dream, Kian said softly. But the likes of Talbot don't care about noble dreams. To them, water is power, plain and simple. They watched the bobbing lanterns disappear toward town. The night seemed darker afterward, as if the lights had taken something vital with them. The weight of the coming fight settled over the small house like a heavy blanket. Kim gathered her mending, her movements slow with weariness. Perhaps, she hesitated. Perhaps God has a purpose in all this. Why else would he bring me here? To you, at just this moment. Kian turned from the window to study her face in the lamplight. He saw fear there, yes, but also a quiet strength that reminded him of the young girl who had once risked everything to save a stranger's life. Get some rest, he said gently. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. She nodded, climbing the ladder to her loft. But they both knew sleep would be long in coming this night, with the future suddenly as uncertain as water in a drought. Outside, a coyote called into the darkness, its lonely cry echoing off the hills. From somewhere up in the loft came the soft murmur of prayer, asking not for victory or power, but simply for a place to belong, a place to call home. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Kim stood at the kitchen window, kneading bread dough when she spotted them, 3 riders moving slow along the fence line. They made no attempt to hide their presence, their horses ambling at a walk as the men's heads turned deliberately toward the ranch house. Don't let them trouble you, Kian said quietly, coming up behind her. Gossip travels faster than truth out here. Kim's hands stilled in the dough. They act like they're marking boundaries. That's exactly what they're doing. Kian wiped trail dust from his hat. Banker Talbot's men, I'd wager. Making sure we know we're being watched. The riders finally moved on, but their message lingered like a shadow. Kim returned to her bread making, trying to lose herself in the familiar motions, while Kian headed out to check the stock in town that same morning. Banker Talbot paced the polished floors of his office, his usual composure cracking. He had called an emergency meeting of the town's prominent businessmen, and now 12 men crowded his private office, their faces reflecting various degrees of concern. Gentlemen, Talbot began, his voice tight with controlled anger, we face a serious situation. The water rights to Eagle Creek, rights that should rightfully belong to this township, have fallen into questionable hands. The half-breed girl? Someone asked. Mrs. Wyatt now, another corrected. Sheriff saw to that right quick. Talbot's fist struck his desk. Marriage doesn't change the fundamental problem. Those water rights must be transferred to responsible hands. The future of this town depends on controlled access to that creek. What do you propose? First, we make an offer, a generous one. Talbot's smile didn't reach his eyes. If that fails, we'll explore other options. The girl must be made to understand that some responsibilities are beyond her capabilities. The men nodded, though a few shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Water rights were valuable, yes, but something in Talbot's tone suggested he would stop at nothing to acquire them. Sunday morning brought a different kind of tension. Cian helped Kim into the wagon, noting how she had carefully mended her best dress for church. The ride to town was quiet, both aware of what they would face. The little white church sat bathed in morning light, its steeple reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing the way. As they climbed down from the wagon, Kim felt the weight of stares from folks gathering on the steps. Whispers followed them inside, spreading through the pews like wind through prairie grass. Can't believe she thinks she can. Not natural. Holding such rights. Poor Cian, trapped in this. Pastor Harlan stood at the pulpit, his weathered Bible open before him. His gentle eyes met theirs as they took seats near the back, and when he began his sermon, his words seemed chosen with purpose. "Today we read from Amos," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the church. "Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. The Lord's justice, my friends, often flows in unexpected channels. His righteousness may come through hands we never thought to trust." Kim sat very still, feeling the message settle over the congregation. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded slowly. Pastor Harlan continued preaching about God's surprising ways of working justice, his eyes occasionally meeting theirs with quiet encouragement. After the service, the true test began. Some parishioners hurried past with cold nods or averted eyes. Others lingered, curiosity warring with ingrained prejudice. Kim stood beside Cian, accepting each reaction with quiet dignity. Then came the surprise. An older woman with Cian's eyes and bearing approached them, her face kind beneath her Sunday bonnet. "I'm Elizabeth Wyatt," she said, taking Kim's hands in hers. Cian's mother. "Welcome to the family, dear." Kim's eyes filled with tears at the simple acceptance. "Thank you, Mrs. Wyatt. Call me Mother Elizabeth, as my other daughters-in-law do." She squeezed Kim's hands. "Come to tea this week. We have much to discuss." The unexpected kindness followed them home like a warm breeze, softening the memory of colder greetings. As evening settled over the ranch, Cian found Kim in the kitchen, her face thoughtful as she prepared their supper. "We'll stand firm," he said, answering her unspoken question. "The deed is legal, and you have every right to it." Kim nodded, stirring the beans slowly. "I've been thinking," she said. "I could take in laundry from the ranch hands and miners. Every bit helps, and it would show I'm willing to work hard, to be part of the community. You don't have to prove anything to them," Cian said softly. "No," she agreed. "But I want to build something here, not just defend it." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and a hesitant smile passed between them, the first real one they had shared. Understanding flickered in that moment. They were in this together, whatever came. The evening settled into familiar rhythms, Cian checking the stock one last time, Kim gathering eggs for morning. The simple chores grounded them, a reminder that life continued despite the day's tensions. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, they moved around each other in the barn with growing ease, their actions falling into an unspoken pattern. The day's events had drawn clear lines in the community, those who would oppose them, those who might support them, and those who watched and waited to see which way the wind would blow. But here in the quiet of evening chores, with lamplight spilling from their windows and the promise of supper waiting inside, those lines seemed less important than the small peace they had found in working side by side. The morning sun cast long shadows across the barnyard as Kim followed Cian toward the cow pen. Her new boots, purchased from the general store with her small savings, still felt stiff against her ankles. She watched carefully as Cian demonstrated how to position the milk pail beneath old Betty, the gentlest of their 3 dairy cows. Easy now, Kian instructed, his voice low and steady. Let her get used to your touch first. Kim reached out, running her hand along Betty's warm flank. The cow's tail swished lazily, but she remained calm. Following Kian's example, Kim settled onto the small stool and began milking with uncertain fingers. Like this? She asked, trying to mimic his technique. That's right. Kian nodded approvingly. You've got gentle hands. The cows will take to you quick enough? Over the next few days, Kim threw herself into learning every aspect of ranch life. She rose before dawn, determined to master each new task Kian showed her. The work was hard, but it gave her purpose. Even when her muscles ached and her hands grew rough, she pressed on Dot by the fence line. Kian showed her how to test posts for rod and replace worn sections. These need checking regular, he explained, demonstrating how to swing the hammer. Especially after winter thaws, Kim proved a quick study, though the work left blisters on her palms. She learned to grip tools properly, to conserve her strength, to move with the rhythm of ranch life. In the kitchen, she expanded beyond simple meals, experimenting with heartier stews and fresh-baked bread that filled the house with welcome aromas that not everyone approved of her efforts. Riders still passed by daily, their whispered comments carrying on the wind. Ain't natural, or trying to play rancher's wife ... Won't last a season. Should know her place. Kim kept her head high, though each barb stung. Kian noticed how she'd pause in her work sometimes, waiting for the riders to pass, then resume with renewed determination. He found himself watching her more and more, surprised by her quiet strength. One afternoon, as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, the wind picked up suddenly. Kim looked up from hanging laundry, noting how the sky had turned an ominous green-gray. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Storm's coming, Kian called from the barn. A big one. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as they hurried to secure everything. Wind whipped Kim's skirts as she helped Kian close up the chicken coop. Lightning flashed, followed by a crack of thunder that made the ground shake. Then Kim heard it. The frightened bleating of young calves in the far pasture. Without hesitation, she gathered her skirts and ran toward the sound. Rain pelted her face as she spotted 3 calves huddled against the fence, separated from their mothers. We need to get them to the barn, she shouted over the wind. Kian appeared beside her, and together they began herding the frightened animals toward shelter. The storm raged around them as they worked. Kim's hair came loose, plastering against her face, but she kept moving, speaking softly to the scared calves. Lightning split the sky again and again, but she didn't flinch. Finally, they got the last calf safely into the barn. Kian secured the door as Kim checked on the animals, making sure none were injured. They stood there in the relative quiet of the barn, both soaked to the skin, listening to the storm rage outside. When Kian looked at Kim, he saw her in a new light, not as someone to be protected, but as a true partner in the work. Later that evening, after they'd changed into dry clothes and the storm had begun to roll away eastward, they sat before the fireplace with cups of hot coffee. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as distant thunder growled. You showed real grit today, Kian said quietly, breaking their comfortable silence. Most folks would have let those calves weather the storm on their own. Kim smiled softly. Every creature deserves care when it's afraid. She paused, then added, like you deserved care. That day I found you wounded. Kian stared into the fire, memories stirring. The comfortable quiet between them gave him courage to speak of things long buried. My Sarah, he began slowly. My first wife, she died 5 years ago. Fever took her in just 3 days. His voice grew rough. After that, I couldn't seem to find my way back to living. Just existed, I suppose. Grew bitter at God, at the world. Withdrew from everyone, even my own mother. Kim listened without interrupting, her eyes full of understanding. When he fell silent, she spoke softly of her own loss. After my father died, I felt so alone. The mission ladies meant well, but they didn't understand. I wasn't white enough for their world, wasn't Apache enough for my mother's people. She traced the rim of her coffee cup. I used to hide in the hills sometimes, just to feel close to the sky my father loved so much. Is that where you found me? Kian asked. Kim nodded. I'd been gathering herbs. When I saw you lying there. She smiled at the memory. My mother always said every stranger is a chance to show God's love. She used to pray in Apache and English both, saying the Great Spirit understands all tongues. My mother was always singing hymns. Kian remembered, his voice warming. Even when times were hard, she'd be humming Amazing Grace or What a Friend We Have in Jesus while she worked. Those were my father's favorites, too. Kim's eyes brightened. He said music speaks straight to the heart, no matter what language you pray in. They sat together as the fire burned lower, sharing memories of faith passed down through generations. Kim spoke of her mother's quiet strength, of prayers whispered over morning cornmeal. Kian recalled Sunday afternoons when his family would gather on the porch, their voices rising in harmony as the sun set. The storm had passed completely now, leaving behind a cleaned world and fresh-washed air. Through the window, stars began to peek through breaking clouds. Neither Kim nor Kian moved to light the lamps yet, content in the firelight's warm glow and each other's company. Something had shifted between them, as subtle as the changing weather, but just as real. The forced marriage that had begun in awkwardness was growing into something else, a partnership built on shared work, shared faith, and growing trust. As they sat in comfortable silence, the warmth between them had nothing to do with the fire's heat. Kim's quiet strength and unwavering faith touched something in Kian that he'd thought long dead. And Kian's gradual opening up, his willingness to share his pain, showed Kim that she'd found more than just shelter in this marriage. She'd found someone who might truly understand her heart. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the night, its lonely song now somehow less lonely. Inside, two people who had known too much solitude found themselves drawing closer, not by grand gestures or declarations, but in the simple sharing of memories, faith, and trust. Morning dew still sparkled on the grass when the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the quiet at the ranch. Kim looked up from where she was gathering eggs, her basket only half full. 3 riders approached from the east, kicking up dust along the trail. Kian emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his work pants. His expression hardened as he recognized the lead rider, Banker Talbot, his black coat pristine despite the dusty ride. 2 rough-looking men flanked him, their faces unfamiliar and unfriendly. "Stay close to the house," Kian murmured to Kim as she passed. She nodded, clutching her egg basket closer. The riders pulled up in the yard, their horses stamping restlessly. Talbot's mount was a sleek bay stallion, far too fine for ranch work. The banker himself sat tall in his English saddle, looking down his nose at the modest homestead. "Mr. Wyatt," Talbot called out, his voice carrying a false note of friendliness. "Mrs. Wyatt," he tipped his hat to Kim, though his eyes were cold. "I trust you're settling into married life?" "We're doing just fine," Kian answered evenly. His right hand rested casually near his holstered Colt, though he made no move toward it. "What brings you out this way?" Talbot dismounted with practiced grace, his boots raising small puffs of dust. "Business, I'm afraid. A matter that needs addressing." He turned to Kim, who stood straight-backed on the porch. "My dear, I've come about that deed of yours." Kim's fingers tightened on the basket handle. "The water rights are mine by law, Mr. Talbot." The lawyer made that clear. "Indeed, indeed." Talbot's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But surely you understand that such valuable property requires proper management. The railroad's expansion won't wait for sentiment. The deed stays with my wife." Kian said firmly. That's all there is to it. Talbot's expression hardened. He gestured to his companions, who had remained mounted, their hands resting near their gun belts. I'm trying to be reasonable here. A fair price for the deed would solve so many problems. He focused on Kim again. For your own safety, my dear. The frontier can be dangerous for those who resist progress. Kim felt her heart pound, but kept her voice steady. Are you threatening me, Mr. Talbot? Threatening? Oh no. The banker spread his hands in mock surprise. Simply stating facts. Accidents happen out here. Fires start. Cattle disappear. It would be a shame if misfortune found its way to your door. Kian took 2 measured steps forward, his hand still near his Colt. You've said your piece, Talbot. Now ride out. The banker's facade of civility cracked. Don't be a fool, Wyatt. You're in over your head. Both of you. He swung back into his saddle, gathering his reins tight. Consider my offer carefully. Things change quickly in these parts, especially for those who stand in the way of progress. With that, he wheeled his horse around. His men followed, and the 3 riders thundered away, leaving only dust and tension in their wake. Kim's legs felt weak. She gripped the porch rail, her knuckles white. The egg basket slipped from her other hand, forgotten until Kian caught it before it could spill. He means to hurt us, she whispered. To take everything. Kian set the basket safely aside and took her trembling hands in his. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and fierce. No harm will come to you while I draw breath. This is our land, our home. We'll defend it together. Kim looked up into his face, seeing the determination there. I never meant to bring such trouble to your door. You brought no trouble. Talbot and his kind make their own trouble. Kian squeezed her hands gently. They've forgotten that this land was meant for honest folk, not speculators and railroad men. They spent the rest of the morning going about their usual tasks, though both kept glancing toward the road. Every distant sound made them pause, wondering if Talbot's men would return. Kim found herself jumping at shadows, hating her own nervousness but unable to shake it. As evening approached, they heard another horse approaching. This time, it was young Tommy from the telegraph office, his pony lathered from hard riding. Message from Mrs. Wyatt, he called out, waving a yellow envelope. Marked urgent. Kim's hand shook slightly as she opened the telegram. Kian stood close, reading over her shoulder in the fading light. Cousin Kim, stoppered of your troubles. Stop a page kin, await you in safety. Stop come soon before winter stop medicine woman. Ask for you stop your blood. Remembers STOP. Message was signed by a distant cousin who lived near the reservation lands. Kim read it twice, her heart pulling in different directions. My mother's people? She said softly. They offer shelter. They moved inside as darkness fell, lighting the lamps and settling at the kitchen table to talk. Steam rose from their coffee cups as they considered their options. Maybe I should go, Kim said, tracing the telegram's words with her finger. Just for a while, until things settle here. It might bring strength to be among my mother's people again, or it might bring more scorn from the townfolk, Kian pointed out gently. They're already looking for reasons to doubt you belong here. Kim nodded, knowing he spoke truth. But my cousin wouldn't have sent this without reason. The medicine woman was my mother's aunt. She doesn't send for people lightly. Whatever you decide, Kian said, we face it together now. That's what marriage means, forced or not. His words warmed her, easing some of the day's fear. They talked long into the evening, weighing choices. In the end, they decided to stay at least for now. Running might feel safer, but it would only prove Talbot right about their weakness. We'll prepare, Kian said firmly. Whatever comes next. After Kim retired to the loft, Kian sat in his chair by the fire, his rifle across his knees. The lamplight gleamed on the barrel as he cleaned it with practiced care, each motion precise and thorough. The weapon had been his father's, carried through years of frontier life. Now it would help guard not just his ranch, but his bride, this quiet, strong woman who had somehow become more than just a responsibility. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkened range. Inside, Kian worked steadily, the soft cloth moving over steel, preparing for whatever tomorrow might bring. Up in the loft, Kim whispered prayers in 2 languages, asking for guidance and protection. Both of them knew that Talbot's threat was only the beginning. The lamp burned low as midnight approached. Kian finished his task, the rifle now ready if needed. He checked the locks one final time, then banked the fire for the night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, the ranch was quiet. They would face whatever came next together, united in purpose, if not yet in heart. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when hoofbeats thundered toward the ranch. Kian reached for his rifle, but lowered it when he recognized young Billy Peters, the telegraph operator's son, riding hard through the gate. "Mr. Wyatt." "Mrs. Wyatt," Billy called out, breathless. "It's Tommy Wilson, the blacksmith's boy. He's taken bad sick with fever." Kim appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "How bad is it, Billy?" "Real bad, ma'am. Doc Sanders is 3 days ride away, delivering babies up north. Tommy's burning up something fierce, and folks are scared it might be catching." Kim's face set with determination. "Kian, we need to go to town. Now hold on," Kian protested, following as she hurried inside to gather supplies. "The same folks who've been threatening us are scared for their children," Kim finished, pulling dried herbs from the rafters. "Tommy Wilson is 10 years old. His father shoes our horses, and his mother always gives fair measure at the dry goods store." Kian watched as she packed a basket with herbs, clean cloths, and the medicine bag she'd inherited from her mother. Her movements were quick but sure, revealing the healer's training she rarely spoke about. "The town might not welcome your help," he warned softly. Kim paused, her hand resting on the basket handle. "Maybe not, but I can't stay here knowing a child might die when I could help." She looked up at him, her dark eyes steady. "Will you help me?" Kian nodded, already reaching for his coat. "I'll hitch up the wagon." The ride into town seemed endless, though Billy had ridden ahead to announce their coming. As they approached Wilson's smithy, they could see worried faces peering from windows and doorways. Some showed open hostility, others uncertainty. Sarah Wilson met them at the door, her face drawn with fear. "Mrs. Wyatt, Kim, thank you for coming. Tommy's up in his room. The fever won't break, and he's starting to see things that ain't there." Kim moved swiftly up the narrow stairs, Kian following with her supplies. The small bedroom was stifling, heavy with the smell of sickness. Tommy lay thrashing on sweat-soaked sheets, his face flushed crimson. "We need cool water," Kim directed, rolling up her sleeves. "And fresh air." She moved to open the window while Kian went to fetch water. Outside, voices muttered about contagion and danger. Some suggested blocking the door to keep the sickness contained. Kian's jaw tightened as he carried water up the stairs, but Kim seemed oblivious to everything except her patient. She worked steadily through the morning, bathing Tommy's burning skin with cool cloths, coaxing sips of herbal tea between his cracked lips. She murmured prayers in English and Apache, her hands gentle but confident. Kian stood guard by the door, fetching fresh water and clean linens as needed. As afternoon faded into evening, more townspeople gathered outside. Some brought food for the Wilsons, though few ventured inside. Pastor Harlan arrived, offering prayers from the doorway. Mrs. Wyatt, Kian's mother, pushed through the crowd with a pot of soup and fresh bread. "The boy needs strength," she announced firmly, glaring at those who would have stopped her. "And so do those tending him." Night fell, but Kim didn't pause in her vigil. She showed Sarah Wilson how to change the cool cloths, explained which herbs were in the tea. Kian dozed in a chair by the door, waking at every sound from below. Near midnight, Tommy's fever peaked. The boy thrashed and cried out, calling for his mother. Kim held his hand, singing softly and Apache while Sarah Wilson wept quietly beside her. Kian felt helpless, able only to pray and watch as his wife fought death with nothing but herbs, cloth, and faith. Finally, as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, Tommy's fever broke. His breathing eased, his skin cooled, and he fell into natural sleep. Kim sagged in her chair, exhausted but smiling. "He'll be all right now," she assured the Wilsons. "Keep him quiet today, and make sure he drinks plenty of the tea I left." John Wilson, the blacksmith, grabbed Kim's hands in his huge calloused ones. "You saved our boy," he said gruffly. "We won't forget this." Sarah Wilson hugged Kim tightly, tears flowing freely. "God bless you," she whispered. "We were wrong about you." So wrong. Word spread quickly through the waking town. By the time Kian helped Kim down the stairs, neighbors were gathering with offerings of thanks: fresh eggs, preserves, a loaf of still warm bread. Even those who had been most suspicious nodded respectfully. Mrs. Parker, who had once crossed the street to avoid Kim, pressed a jar of honey into her hands. "For your healing teas," she said. "My Henry had that same fever last summer. We lost him for lack of knowing what you know." The ride home was quiet, both of them tired but content. The morning sun painted the prairie grass gold, and meadowlarks called from fence posts along the way. Kim dozed against Kian's shoulder as he drove, her medicine basket empty of herbs but full of gifts from grateful neighbors dotted the ranch. Kian insisted Kim rest while he tended to the morning chores. When he brought her dinner that evening, he found her sorting through her depleted herb supply, making lists of what she needed to gather or grow. "You're something else, you know that?" he said, setting down the tray. Kim looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "When the sheriff first told me I had to marry you, I thought it was just one more burden to bear." Kian sat beside her, his expression soft in the lamplight. "I was wrong. You're no burden at all. You're a blessing to this ranch, to the town, to me." Color rose in Kim's cheeks, but her eyes shone with joy at his words. "I only did what needed doing," she said quietly. "You did more than that. You showed them all what I'm starting to see, that you belong here, that you make this place better." He reached out and touched her hand gently. "I'm proud to call you my wife." Kim's blush deepened, and she ducked her head shyly. But her fingers curled around his, warm and sure, like they had always belonged there. The evening settled around them peacefully. Through the open window came the familiar sounds of cattle lowing in the distance, chickens settling in for the night, and the first cricket songs of early evening. The dangers hadn't passed Talbot, and his threats still loomed, but something had shifted. They faced it now not as two strangers bound by circumstance, but as partners who had chosen to trust each other. The peaceful evening shattered, with the crack of gunfire and thundering hooves. Kian jolted awake, his arm instinctively reaching for Kim beside him. Through the window, shadows moved against starlight riders circling the house. "Get down," he shouted, pulling Kim to the floor, just as something crashed through the front window. Glass tinkled across wooden boards, and suddenly orange light flared. The acrid smell of coal oil filled the air. "Fire bottles," Kian growled. More crashes followed, flames spreading rapidly across the floor and up the walls. Smoke began to fill the room, thick and choking. Kim scrambled to her feet, coughing. "The deed, the papers, no time." Kian grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the door as flames licked up the curtains. Heat pressed against them like a physical wall. Outside, horses whinnied in fear as more bottles shattered against the house. They burst onto the porch, gulping clean air. The night had turned hellish orange flames reflected in the windows, black smoke billowing up toward the stars. Gunshots cracked again, splintering wood near their heads. The barn. Kian pushed Kim toward the outbuilding, keeping his body between her and the riders. They sprinted across the yard as bullets kicked up dirt at their feet. The raiders' horses thundered away into the darkness, their work done. Kim stumbled, choking on smoke. "The animals, I'll get them." Kian shoved her toward the barn door. "Get water flowing from the pump. We have to keep the barn from catching." She nodded, face streaked with soot, and ran for the pump while Kian dashed toward the burning house. The heat was incredible now, windows exploding from the intensity. He managed to throw open the corral gates, sending the horses galloping to safety. The cattle had already broken free, scattering into the night. Back at the barn, Kim had organized a bucket line. Her hands shook but remained steady as she passed water to Kian. Together, they soaked the barn's wooden walls, fighting to keep sparks from igniting the dry timber. The house was beyond saving flames roared through the roof now, turning night to day. "Keep it wet," Kian shouted, dumping another bucket against hot wood. "If the barn catches, we lose everything." They worked desperately as the house collapsed in on itself, sending a fountain of sparks skyward. The crack and groan of falling timbers filled the air, along with the acrid stench of burning kerosene. Kim's soft sobs mixed with the roar of flames as their home crumbled. Hoofbeats approached, but this time bringing help instead of destruction. Neighbors appeared out of the darkness, drawn by the fire's glow. John Wilson arrived first, followed by Pastor Harlan and others from town. "Dear God," the pastor breathed, staring at the inferno. "Everyone all right?" Kian nodded grimly, still throwing water on the barn. "We got out. House is gone." The neighbors joined the bucket line, working to save what they could. But whispers already circulated through the group. Kim heard them as she passed buckets, whispers about curses and ill fortune, about mixing blood and defying natural order. "It's that Indian girl," someone muttered. "Brought nothing but trouble since she came." "Hush now," Mrs. Wilson snapped, but the damage was done. Kim's hands trembled harder as she worked, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face. Finally, the house fire began to die, leaving only glowing embers where their home had stood. The barn was saved, though its walls were scorched. As neighbors dispersed, making awkward offers of help, Kian and Kim stood amid the destruction. "Everything's gone," Kim whispered. "All your things, your memories, ... Things can be replaced." Kian's voice was fierce. "You're alive. That's what matters." Pastor Harlan approached, hat in hands. "You can stay at the church until we'll manage here." Kian cut him off. "But we'd be grateful for any spare blankets folk might lend." The pastor nodded, understanding Kian's pride. "I'll send what I can, and I'll pray for justice to find those responsible." After the last neighbor left, Kian and Kim gathered what they could salvage. It wasn't much. Some tools from the barn, cooking pots that had been outside, the clothes on their backs. The deed to Kim's water rights had burned with everything else. They made a makeshift bed in the barn's hayloft, using blankets the neighbors had left. The night had grown cold, and Kim shivered despite the covers. Kian pulled her close, sharing what warmth he could. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the darkness. "So sorry. Everything I touch turns to ash. Maybe they're right about the curse." "Stop." Kian's voice was rough with emotion. He took her hands in his, gripping them firmly. "Look at me, Kim." She raised tear-filled eyes to his face, barely visible in the faint starlight filtering through the barn's gaps. "You are not cursed," he said firmly. "You're the greatest blessing God sent me since Sarah died. You heal the sick. You work harder than any two men. You face hatred with kindness. That's not a curse. That's providence. But your home was just wood and nails until you came. You made it a real home again." His hands tightened on hers. "We'll rebuild. Better than before." and we'll do it together." Kim's breath caught on a sob. "Why? Why would you still want me here after all this?" "Because God sent you to me." Kian's voice softened. "I was bitter, angry at him for taking Sarah. Thought he'd abandoned me. Then he brought you first to save my life in the hills, then to save my soul through this marriage. That's not coincidence. That's divine providence." The night pressed close around them, cold seeping through the barn walls. But Kim felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words. She leaned her head against his shoulder, their fingers still intertwined. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me as more than my blood or my past. Thank you for helping me see God's hand again." Kian's arm tightened around her. "Now rest. Tomorrow we start rebuilding." They huddled together in the hayloft, surrounded by the familiar sounds of night on the prairie, crickets chirping, cattle lowing in the distance, wind whistling through the barn's weathered boards. Their home was ashes, their possessions gone, but something stronger had emerged from the fire, a bond forged in crisis, a shared determination to stand against hatred and fear. As Kim drifted into uneasy sleep, Kian kept watch through the night, his hand never leaving hers. The ranch house might be gone, but home, he was learning, was more than just walls and a roof. It was the person beside you, facing whatever came with faith and courage. And by that measure, he was more at home than he'd been in years. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds that seemed to mock the destruction below. Kian and Kim stood side by side, surveying what remained of their home. The once proud ranch house was now nothing more than a blackened skeleton of timber and ash, still smoking in the crisp morning air. "Lord have mercy," Kim whispered, her voice rough from the previous night's smoke. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the borrowed shawl Mrs. Wilson had brought. Kian's jaw tightened as he studied the ruins. Most of the walls had collapsed inward, leaving only the stone chimney standing like a lonely sentinel. Broken glass and scorched belongings littered the yard, glinting dully in the early light. "I need to ride into town," he said finally, turning to Kim. "We'll need supplies if we're to make the barn livable." His eyes softened as he looked at her ash-streaked face. "Will you be all right here alone?" Kim nodded, squaring her shoulders. "I can start cleaning the barn. Make it more homey." The word caught in her throat, but she pressed on. "Maybe salvage what I can from the . She gestured helplessly at the ruins. "Be careful in there," Kian warned. "The timbers aren't stable." He hesitated, then squeezed her shoulder gently before heading to the barn to saddle his horse. Kim watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the rising sun. Then she turned toward the barn, gathering her resolve. The large building would be their home now, at least until they could rebuild. She refused to let despair overwhelm her. Inside, morning light filtered through gaps in the weathered boards, illuminating dust motes and scattered hay. Kim found a broom and began sweeping, working methodically to clear space for living. The physical labor helped keep darker thoughts at bay. She discovered some pots and pans that had been stored in the barn, black with soot but salvageable. Carrying them outside to the pump, she began scrubbing, her hands reddening in the cold water. Each cleaned item felt like a small victory against the destruction. In town, Kian endured the stares and whispers as he gathered supplies. The general store owner was civil enough, but others turned away when he passed. He could hear their muttered comments about that Indian girl and trouble. Following mixed blood, loading supplies into his saddlebags, he caught sight of banker Talbot watching from his office window, a satisfied smirk playing across his face. Kian's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, but he forced it back to the reins. Violence wouldn't solve their problems. It would only prove the townspeople right about Kim bringing trouble. Back at the ranch, Kim had made progress with the barn. She'd cleared a corner for sleeping, hung some borrowed blankets for privacy, and arranged their few salvaged possessions carefully. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The clip-clop of hooves announced a visitor. Kim tensed until she recognized Pastor Harlan's gentle voice calling out. He dismounted slowly, his aging joints protesting, and removed his hat as he approached. "My child," he said softly, taking in her soot-stained dress and reddened hands. "My heart grieves for what was done here." Kim's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "Pastor, I don't understand. Why would God allow this?" The old preacher guided her to a fallen log, sitting beside her. "The Lord's ways are not always clear to us," he said, pulling out his worn Bible. "But he promises to be with us in times of trouble." Together, they bowed their heads as Pastor Harlan prayed, his weathered voice carrying on the morning breeze. He asked for protection, for guidance, and for the strength to forgive those who had wronged them. When Kian returned, he found them still sitting there, the pastor offering quiet counsel as Kim nodded, tears tracking down her cheeks. Something in his chest tightened at the sight of her vulnerability. Pastor Harlan stood as Kian approached, clasping his hand firmly. "The Lord will provide," he said, his eyes kind but determined. "And so will his people. I've already spoken to several families about helping with rebuilding." After the pastor left, Kim and Kian worked together to organize the supplies he'd brought: nails, tools, food staples, and basic necessities. The afternoon passed in shared labor, both finding comfort in keeping their hands busy. As evening approached, Kim stirred a simple stew made from vegetables and dried beef, watching the pot swing over their makeshift fire pit outside the barn. The familiar task couldn't quite mask the strangeness of their situation. The weight of the day finally overcame her. Setting down her spoon, she sank to her knees, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How can this be your plan, Lord? How can any good come from such hatred?" Kian heard her crying as he returned from checking the horses. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her, his strong hands gentle on her shoulders. "I asked those same questions," he said quietly, "after Sarah died. Cursed God, turned my back on him. Figured he'd turned his back on me first." Kim looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. "What changed?" Realized surviving was itself a kind of answer. Kian's voice grew thoughtful. "Each sunrise I saw, each breath I took, those were gifts I couldn't deny, even in my anger. And then," he paused, meeting her gaze, "then he sent a young girl to tend my wounds in the wilderness, showing me kindness had no boundaries." Kim's breath caught as she remembered those days, her younger self secretly caring for the injured stranger. "I was so afraid," she admitted, "but something told me I had to help." "That was God's voice," Kian said firmly. "Same voice that brought you back to me through this marriage. We might not understand his path, but we can trust he's leading us somewhere." Slowly, hesitantly, Kim reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined as naturally as breathing. "Will you pray with me?" she asked softly. Together, they knelt in the dirt, their clasped hands forming a bridge between them. Kian's deep voice joined Kim's gentle one, asking for strength, for guidance, for the faith to see God's plan even in their darkest moments. As they prayed, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, its beauty untouched by the destruction below. A cool evening breeze carried the scent of sage and prairie grass, reminding them that life continued despite their losses. After their prayer, Kian rose and began working on the new support beams they'd need for rebuilding. The steady rhythm of his axe filled the gathering dusk as he shaped fresh timber. Kim watched him while she stirred the stew, finding comfort in his determination. The simple meal they shared that evening tasted better than any fancy feast. Perhaps it was their prayer, or maybe just shared adversity, but something had shifted between them. Their faith, tested by fire, had emerged stronger, like steel tempered in flames. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Kim ladled out second helpings of stew. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me remember God hasn't abandoned us." Kian paused in his eating, looking at her thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why he brought us together," he said, "to help each other remember." The night settled around them, cool but clear. From the darkness came the familiar sounds of the prairie crickets, chirping, a distant coyote's call, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. These sounds, unchanged by their tragedy, reminded them that not everything had been lost. Kim gathered the dishes to wash, while Kian returned to his woodworking, the soft scrape of his knife against wood joining the nighttime chorus. Their faith might have been tested, but it had not broken. Instead, like the support beams Kian was carving, it was being shaped into something stronger, something that could bear the weight of their shared future. In the barn shelter, they had begun to create a new kind of home, one built not of wood and nails, but of shared courage, renewed faith, and growing love. Though challenges still lay ahead, they would face them together, strengthened by the knowledge that God's plan, though mysterious, was unfolding in his own time. The crunch of hooves on gravel announced Sheriff Amos's arrival at the ranch. His shoulders sagged as he dismounted, guilt etched deep in the lines of his weathered face. Kim and Kian met him at what remained of their burnt porch. "Got something to say," the sheriff began, removing his hat. "Been weighing heavy on my conscience." He looked directly at Kim, his voice rough with shame. "That marriage order wasn't for your protection. Truth is, I wanted to quiet the scandal in town. Thought shipping you off would solve everything." Kim's hand found Kian's, squeezing tight. The sheriff continued, "But I've seen how you've handled yourself. Your steadfastness, your kindness with the blacksmith's boy. You deserve justice, not what we did to you." His next words came with urgency. "Talbot's making moves. He's filing papers to seize your deed through the courts. Claims you ain't fit to hold water rights." Kian's jaw tightened. "When?" "Hearings set for next week." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "You'll need to come to town, face the judge." That evening, as Kim cooked cornbread on the coals of their outdoor fire, Kian spoke with quiet determination. "I'll stand beside you, before judge and banker alike. Won't let them take what's rightfully yours." Kim nodded, her own resolve strengthening. Above them, the wind whistled through the barn's timbers, a lonely sound that matched their uncertain future. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Kim and Kian made their way down the center aisle. Townsfolk packed the wooden benches, their whispers echoing off the high ceiling. Banker Talbot's lawyer stood at attention, his polished boots gleaming. Mr. Hollis stepped forward, presenting the deed with careful precision. "This document shows clear inheritance rights," he stated, his voice steady. Talbot's lip curled. "We can't have savage blood controlling our water," he sneered, causing Kim to flinch. The judge's expression remained cool as marble as he adjusted his spectacles. The tap-tap of a cane cut through the murmurs. All heads turned as an elderly man in a warm cavalry uniform made his way forward. "Dr. Matthews." "Your Honor," he announced. "I served with Kim's father. He was our scout and trader, as honorable a man as any. The treaty rights to that land are binding by law." Sheriff Amos rose from his seat, hat in hand. "I forced this marriage on them," he admitted, voice thick with regret. "But I stand now for what's right. The land is hers by law." Talbot's face reddened as he sputtered protests, but the judge raised his hand for silence. "I will deliberate on this matter," he declared, rising. Outside, Kim's fingers intertwined with Kian's as they waited, her whole body trembling with hope and fear. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as the judge returned to his bench. The room fell silent, every breath held in anticipation. His gavel struck once, sharp and clear. "The deed stands," he declared firmly. "Miss Kim's inheritance is lawful and binding. Furthermore, I warn against any future threats or interference with her property rights." Relief washed over Kim's face as she closed her eyes in silent gratitude. Around the courthouse, townsfolk offered quiet applause. Banker Talbot's face twisted with rage as he stormed through the doors, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Kim rose slowly, her voice steady and clear. "I thank the Lord for his justice," she said, "and I want to share the water rights with families who are struggling to keep their farms." Her words hung in the air, silencing even those who had scorned her. That afternoon, wagon wheels crunched up the ranch road. Neighbors appeared with tools and lumber, ready to rebuild. Children carried baskets of food, while men shouldered beams and crates of nails. Pastor Harlan gathered everyone in a circle, heads bowed as he led them in prayer for the rebuilding. Kian stood behind Kim, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You've given me back more than a home," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You've restored my hope." The new ranch house stood proud against the winter sky, twice as sturdy as before. Frost traced delicate patterns on the glass panes, while inside, warmth and fellowship filled every corner. Neighbors crowded the freshly built rooms, gathering for Pastor Harlan's blessing of the home. Mrs. Wyatt, her silver hair gleaming in the lamplight, took Kim's hand in both of hers. "My daughter," she said, her eyes glistening. "That is what you truly are now." The scent of fresh bread and coffee mingled with the pine wools as folks shared supper around the new table. Hymns rose up, sweet and clear, echoing off the high ceiling. Children dozed by the hearth, while elders swapped tales of seasons past. As the last wagon rolled away into the evening, Keen and Kim stood alone in their home. The lamp cast a gentle glow as he turned to her, taking her small hand in his weathered one. "I knew your touch the moment I felt it again at that altar," he said, voice rough with feeling. "Now it is the touch I will never let go." Tears sparkled in Kim's dark eyes as they knelt together on the new floorboards. Their prayers rose up, thankful for the future God had blessed them with. Outside, countless stars pierced the clear Colorado night, silent witnesses to their new beginning. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.